All right, everyone. I know some of you are on your lunch break, and we like to keep these to 30 minutes and keep it short. My name is Dave Miller. I'm the managing partner of Rosen Dental Transitions. Um, we specialize in helping doctors sell their dental practice, whether it's to their associate, partner, or third party, finding a buyer, whether that's a DSO or a young dentist who was probably like yourself one day looking to buy their practice. We also do practice valuations for those of you that are 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10 years away, to help you understand opportunities on how to grow the value and go from there. So this is the final part on our 5-part series, where we did the sellers webinar. If you missed any of these, they're all available here. Let me actually bring this down a little bit. They're all available on our website. So feel free to go on, download them, watch whatever you missed. We have a bunch of articles. We have a podcast as well that's on Spotify and Apple Podcasts where you can get more information as well. So today we're going to talk about selling to an associate or a partner. And we call it the safest yet most challenging transaction because of the dynamic that exists in those relationships. So one other thing I'll mention as we go through, I have the chat window open. So feel free if throughout to chat and ask questions. If not, we'll have time at the end as well where you can ping me. And as always, you can always reach out after the seminar. So, all right, so let's get into this piece. So, all right, about our Rosen Dental Transitions, we talked briefly about that. All we do is sell dental practices. We're part of the Rosen umbrella of companies. The Rosen and Associates is an accounting firm in the Northeast, mostly New England and upstate New York, that has about over 700 dental accounting clients. And then Rosen Summit Dental Advisors is a consulting team that specializes in practice management. They do outsourced payment posting. So if you're short-staffed up front and you need help getting those insurance payments posted to the accounts and ARs and things like that, or they do business coaching with owners. They do buyer representation, on and on. So between all of us, and there's also a wealth management division. So we can kind of handle everything non-clinical in the practice. And if we don't do it, we know someone who specializes that we've worked with a ton that we can send you over to. One thing I always like to tell people is, when you're going through negotiations, whether it's with your associate or someone else, leverage is most effective when it is real. So I don't believe in bluffing as you go through this process. It's important to do your homework and have all your options available so that you can speak and communicate confidently and effectively through the process. So if you're selling to your associate, there's a couple things we're going to touch on today: partnership or 100% sale. We're going to look at the competing perspectives that makes this negotiation challenging. We call it covering your asset. There's some protection you need to do in this scenario, and that's why I think these can be delicate negotiations and can be tough transitions sometimes. And then lastly, owner financing versus bank financing. I talk to a lot of doctors who say, "Oh, well, I bought it. The owner just held a note. I figured I'd just do the same thing." We'll get into that, but times have changed. Access to capital is not a problem like it used to be for the buyers of these practices, whether it's a partnership or a buy-in. So first off, what should you do in terms of, sometimes it's like, should I have my associate become a partner or should I sell them the whole piece? First off, one of my favorite shows of all time is The Office, and Pam Beasley down here, for those of you who aren't familiar, had a very good quote when her boss was working with a relationship. And he said, "I don't know a lot of happy marriages that start off with an ultimatum. Do you? No. So just be patient." I get calls from so many owners who are essentially almost being held hostage by their associate. And they give them the ultimatum that if you don't let me buy in, I'm going to quit. And so my point is just that, don't get forced into this, because that partnership can be very, very long and be very stressful. And what we say is partnerships are like marriages, but it's harder to get separated. It's harder to split up a partnership sometimes than it is to get divorced. So, be mindful of how you enter into this partnership and go into a partnership for the right reasons. Our personal belief is there's a couple things when considering partnership. Partnerships are good when you intend to have a partner for 5 years or more. Less than that, you're almost just creating redundant legal paperwork. So you're doing a closing, and then you're 3 years later, you're going to do another closing, and you're doing a valuation. You might have to do another valuation in 3 years. So it's important to understand what, why you're going into the partnership and how long you intend to do that. What we recommend if you're doing a shorter term is sell and work for the employee. So if you're like, well, I want to retire in 5 years or 4 years, maybe you own it for 1 or 2 more years, you sell 100% and work for them for 1 or 2 more years, compared to doing a partnership, which would take a year to get done. And then you're partners for 2 years, and then you buy out the other portion, and then you work for them for a year. And you've kind of just created this additional headache and expense for not much benefit. So the other thing is thinking about whether to do partnership or a full buy-in is the percentage that you were going to give them. If you're planning on selling them 5% or 10%, we typically recommend it's easier to, why would someone want 5 or 10%? Do they want profit sharing? Do they want first right of refusal? Do they just want to make sure that you're not going to sell it out from under them to a DSO? Maybe you can accomplish that by doing an enhanced associate agreement where there's some sort of bonus structure. You could put a first right of refusal in the associate agreement, that they would have the opportunity to, match any offer or be the, first right of offer. So you can talk to an attorney about drafting a different associate agreement instead of doing a 10 or 15% partnership. So we think partnerships is really for 15 or 20%. Again, the accounting headache that goes into a partnership, the kind of legal paperwork, all of that, we believe becomes worth it when you're 15, 20% or more. Again, 5 years or less, that's where we think the 100% sale and then working for them as an employee makes more sense. There's probably some sort of agreement you can make of, I had a 4-year timeline instead of making you a partner today, like I talked about. Let's wait a year. You can buy me out at 100%, and then I'll work for you for 2 years as an employee at a percentage of collections or whatever it may be. That's an option that could make a ton of sense. The biggest thing when you're doing that 100% sale is, you want the employment agreement to be friendly. You're ultimately giving up control. So you have to be okay with that and know your personality if you can actually relinquish control. And then a transition plan for your production. If you have a practice that does 2.5 million and you do 1.2 million and the associate does 500, and then the hygiene does the other 7, or however the numbers break out, you have to make a plan for it. You're going to hire an associate and they're going to take over your role. Is the associate who's buying going to expand their schedule to take on their production? What's the plan to transition your clinical work? Because that's the most important thing for the buyer and their security, but also the banks. And how is that practice going to maintain its revenue and cash flow over time? Here's one thing I want to make very clear about partnerships. You are giving up profit. You're giving up future profit in exchange for money today. And so the reason for a partnership, from what I believe, is that it should be because, one, you value having a partner that's going to help balance the workload, balance the management responsibilities. It gives you some security. You're willing to trade some profit for the security that you're not going to have to go find an associate in 2 years because a person goes and buys a different practice. Or you believe that by having a partner, maybe they're a part-time associate and you're going to make them a partner and they're going to be full-time, that you can grow this practice together. Because if you have someone buy in and they pay you for 25% of the practice, if you were partners for longer than 5 years and you don't grow the practice at all, the practice continues to do the collections of revenue that it always did. As the seller, you're going to lose money in the long run, right? Think of it as if you traded 4 years of future profit for a lump sum today. Like, instead of the yearly payout of the lottery, you took all the cash up front. So if you work for 5 years or more, ultimately that share of profit you sold is worth more to the person who owns it. So that can be great for long-term partnerships, but you want to make sure you're comfortable with that. I talk to people all the time that want to bring in a partner and want to go through the process. And then we start talking about the fact that their pay is going to go down. Like, you're going to get a lump sum today, and that'll compensate you for 3 to 4 years for what you're giving up. But after that, your pay is going to be lower than it was. and they can't do that. They can't afford that cash flow hit, or they're not in a comfortable spot. So really understand the idea of why are you getting a partner, and that obtaining a partner means you will make less money unless the practice grows. It's full stop. There's no negotiation on that. So if you're not comfortable with that, if you're not willing to trade a share of profit for peace of mind, stability, assist on the management side, increase clinical capabilities, whatever it is that is driving you to do this, um, then partnership probably is not the right thing for you. There's one reason that negotiations fail, and I picked a video of kids doing tug of war because sometimes it can feel like children fighting on each side of this transaction, lawyers and brokers included, right? Everyone can get emotional and it can get a little messy, but the reality is you have an associate who's saying, I am part of the reason this practice is valued at $2 million. I do $1 million in production. Maybe I do endo. I've been here 10 years. This practice did 1.2 million. And then now that I'm here, it does 2. That's going to be their mindset typically. And they're going to believe that they're entitled to some sort of discount because they have been that associate there. And that's, right or wrong. That's how a lot of them feel. And so I just want to put that out there, that is what you should expect to hear back from your associate. Whether they say it publicly or not, if they negotiate hard on price, I would be shocked if that is not the reason why they are doing that, is that they feel they are entitled to a discount because they contribute to the practice today. And I think to some degree they are right. Like that's a reasonable thing to say. The flip side of that, as the seller, and we represent sellers, is as the owner, you built the platform and the practice and the operatories. You built the goodwill in the community that allowed the associate, right? When they came in, they had no goodwill with the patient base. They were riding the coattails of your goodwill, which led to new patients. You referred patients to them. So they benefited from the platform you've built, and you gave them an opportunity. And most importantly, you paid them fairly. I could understand someone being entitled to a discount if market compensation was 35% of collections and you paid them 30, and you said, listen, I'm only going to pay you 30% of collections, but when you buy this thing, I'm going to give you a 15% discount on the practice because, you have sweat equity, or 20% discount, or whatever it is. That makes sense. But, the reality is that you would have grown that practice, or you could have grown that practice, most likely. I'm not saying all dentists are interchangeable. There are certainly special dentists, but if it wasn't that associate, it could have been someone else, right? And so if they quit, you could likely find another associate to step in and do that production and maintain that. And so it's not like there were no other dentists in the world, but this one came and worked for you, and that's why it grew. Or there's, now if they possess a skill that is hard to replace, they do high-end all-on-X cases, they're doing a lot of cosmetic stuff that you've never done, and that did lead to exponential growth, and you can't do those procedures, then maybe there is something there. Maybe there's some validity to that. But this is the number one issue that will come up that you need to be prepared to have the conversation. Honestly, I tell a lot of sellers, maybe give them a small discount just based on the fact that this is probably a little bit true. Both of you are right. You built a platform that they were able to capitalize and they earned fair wages on, and all of that is true. And they also have been a good associate to you, or else you probably wouldn't be considering them for partnership. And hopefully they've gone above and beyond in some capacity as an employee. So, maybe you do want to give them some small consideration for that. But that's completely your choice. You do not have to do that. And so with this friction in mind, that leads to the third thing, just covering your asset. You have, and this goes back to kind of the quote I had at the beginning, that leverage is best when it's real. What we usually recommend, right? The biggest risk is you go to your associate and say, hey, I'd like to sell you the practice, and here's the price. And the associate says, I'm not willing to pay that. And I want to pay, you're asking 1.5. I'm willing to pay 1.1 or 1 million. And if you're not willing to sell it to me for that, then I'm going to give you my notice and quit. now you're really stuck, right? Because depending on where you're at and how quickly it is to get an associate in there or how big of a producer they are, um, that can be a challenge. So ways to avoid that. One is talk to your associate regularly. If you talk to them every year about, listen, I'm not retiring tomorrow. I'm several years away, but it's been a good partnership and we've been good working together. Would you ever be interested in buying this? Like when that time comes, like I'm a couple years away. And they say, yeah, like their eyes light up and they're excited. Okay, well, maybe I can start to show you some sides of the business and we can do some different things. Like, again, I'm probably 3 or 4 years away, but I want to let you know that. If you never talk about it and then you come to them and you say, hey, would you ever be interested in buying this? And maybe their answer is no, but now they're going to be like, well, if I don't buy it, someone else is. And is he going to sell to a DSO? Like, I hated working for a DSO. I worked at Aspen out of college and or the last practice I worked at, they sold to a DSO and it was miserable. That's why I'm here. It's because this is a family practice. So you want to try and have the conversations regularly so that you don't raise alarms when you bring it up. So how do you protect yourself against that? There's a couple ways. One is by having those regular conversations. The two is having the valuation in advance, getting it far enough that you can think about it and kind of have a plan around timing. The most important thing that we believe is to obtain real-time market feedback and to get additional offers from outside of the practice and see if they're there. So the message to the associate is, listen, I want you to buy this practice and you are absolutely the first choice. However, if you don't buy it, I eventually have to retire. And if you don't want to buy it, you can always work here. There will be a place for you to work. You can have your job here and the staff. There'll be an opportunity for you as long as the buyer wants you, and I'll stay in communication with you about that. But I have to explore other options in the event you don't want to buy it, or you say you don't want to buy it. You don't have to tell them this, but in the back of your head, it's like, really, if you don't want to buy it and then you say you're going to quit, I need another option. Or if you don't want to buy it, then I do need another buyer because I want to retire in a year or 2 years. So what we will do is we'll value the practice, work with the seller, put it on the market, but you have the conversation with the associate first and say, hey, listen, I've decided I want to eventually retire. Here's my timeline. Here's what I'm looking at for a transition plan. I would love for you to buy it. I am going to talk to other people, but if you want to buy the practice, it's yours, right? And all things being equal, or if you're even close, right? I don't want to sell to a DSO, or I'm not really interested in a DSO. But the ideal thing for the staff and the patients would be that you buy the practice. And hopefully you've talked about it before and they've expressed interest in the past. So they're excited about the conversation. And just saying that you're going to the market makes them understand that this is not like hey, if you don't buy it, like it takes away their leverage to threaten you to negotiate. Because again, leverage is best when it's real. Hey, Dr. Smith, I love you. I want you to buy the practice. We were asking 1.5 for the office. I understand you want to buy it for 1.3. I have 4 other offers at 1.5 or 1.55 over asking. And so I'm not saying you have to match it, but you have to come up to 1.45. Like, I'll give you a $50,000 discount because you've been such a great partner. I need you to just come up to my asking price of 1.5. I'm going to stick around to make sure the transition goes well and you're successful. But I love you, mean it, but I don't love you to the point that I'm willing to take a $200,000 haircut on the sale of my business. I've worked this thing for 40 years. It's one of my assets for retirement, and I want you to thrive. And we've priced it fairly. We're not pricing it at a king's ransom. We're pricing it appropriate to the value. You're going to be successful, but you have to pay fair market. So I think those are a couple of things. Talking with them regularly. When you do start the conversation, whether you choose to hire a broker or not, have them sign a non-disclosure agreement, because you don't want your associate going around to the front desk or the office manager and being explicit of saying, listen, you cannot talk about this with the staff, because they go around and say, that, I'm thinking about buying the practice, or, Dr. Smith's looking to sell. And then the front desk gets spooked, or the hygienist gets spooked and they quit. Like maybe people in the office don't like the associate. And so they walk around and say, oh, I'm going to buy it. And the hygienist is like, well, if they're going to be the boss, I'm out of here. Like, I was sticking around for the owner, but this associate's a real piece of work. So again, you just want to make sure that non-disclosure agreements and that you have additional options that in the event this associate tries to negotiate in a way that's kind of in bad faith or tries to really put you over a barrel with the threat of sell it to me for X or I quit, you aren't scared of that. And you can say confidently, listen, the market is telling me my practice is worth a lot more than that. And like, I want you to buy it. All things being equal, you're the buyer. But for 300,000 less or 200,000 less or whatever the number is, I'm not willing to do it. So, all right. We have about 5 more minutes here. One is partnership buy-ins. So just an idea. So you can owner finance it over yourself, whether it's through deferred comp or just holding the loan. Typically, there's not any real benefit to that. That used to be the way it was done because banks would not finance. The reality is, if you're doing a partnership buy-in for 30%, you can go to a bank and they will give you the buyer loan for 30% of the purchase price. You can get that money in cash at closing. That way you can, if you have business debt to pay off, you'd pay the business debt off. You could pay off personal debt. You could invest it and get a return on that over time. But that is, the best way to do it. The bank takes collateral on the business, right? You are using the equity of the practice, not the real estate, not your house. You're using the equity of the business to support this loan. So the bank will take collateral on the business. And then the partner who's buying in, they sign on the loan personally. And the business essentially like co-signs on the loan. You don't sign personally, but like if something goes wrong, the bank's going to come to you and say like, okay, well, do you want this 30% back? Do you want to find a new buyer? Like they're going to give you, you want them to come to you first instead of trying to do something else. So there's different options. Every bank has different guidelines, but we always recommend doing partnerships with financing it through a bank whenever possible. Again, the seller financing just kind of introduces unnecessary risk. The other thing is this an asset deal or a stock deal? If I'm selling 100% of the practice, it's always an asset deal. No one ever buys stock in a dental practice. If it's a partnership, a lot of it depends on your entity. And what I would say is, if it is a stock deal, it is tax-wise more beneficial for the seller, but it unfairly punishes the buyer because they get zero deductions on what they're buying. Think of it, if you buy stock in Amazon, you don't get to deduct your purchase in Amazon. Your deduction or your tax benefit comes when you sell, benefit or consequence. So what it can lead to is if it's a stock deal, a buyer may not pay as much because the tax burden is a lot higher than if it's an asset deal. So talk with your accountant about what your options are based on the entity and is it worth it doing some different structure like we've done in the past. Yeah, so that's a big piece to consider. The other piece is if you own the real estate, you got to think about, when you own 100% of the real estate and 100% of the practice, you can charge whatever rent you want to the business. If you own 100% of the real estate and you have a partner in the practice, you now have to find out what fair market rent is for your market and set the rent at that number, because that's the only way it's fair to the other partner, right? If market rent in your area is $20 a square foot, you can't charge the business 30 just because you own the building. You have to charge it 20. And that's what will reflect the value and make everything fair from that standpoint on. So, I know we blew through a lot. As a heads up, we have an event next Thursday, June 6th at Maggiano's in downtown Boston that is all about this. It's with us, Bank of America, and John Eskow from the Eskow Law Group. We're specifically going to focus on associate transitions and how to navigate that. So if you feel like you want more content, that's a free dinner. It's on our website, or you can email me or ping me and we can share the information. You can register and attend that. It's Thursday night. And like I said, this webinar will be available for download, and we're always available to answer questions. We help people in a lot of different capacities in this scenario, and it just depends on your relationship with your associate and kind of where you stand on things. As far as legal work goes, you're going to have a partnership agreement, like you buy in, or you're going to have an operating agreement. And whether you have 2 separate attorneys or 1 attorney really depends on the comfortability of the incoming partner and the current owner. So there's options there. A lot of people do each get their own attorney just because that kind of feels like a safe way to hedge each other's bets. So, one thing we didn't touch on is, value of partnerships is still based on cash flow. And so similar to how values are done on full practices, partnerships are based on cash flow. One of the things we do say is that, a minority, there's usually a discount. We apply discounts to minority partnership stakes. Buying 100% of something is more valuable than buying 20% of something because you don't have a controlling interest. You don't get to make decisions. So there is a slight discount applied. So don't be surprised if you see that if you have a valuation done by us or anyone else as it relates to a partnership share. So thank you, everyone. I'll hang out for a couple minutes. If there's any questions, feel free to type them in the chat. And again, as always, you can email me. All our contact info is on the website. You can, shoot us a message, give me a call us on our number. We're here to help any way we can. And then if you go to the resources section of our webpage, that's where we have the upcoming events that has the event next week and how you can register. Thank you, everyone. I'll enjoy the rest of your afternoon. And thank you for joining on part 5 of this 5-part Lunch and Learn series.